Thanks for having me, guys. I'll just give you a brief rundown of who I am, what I've done. I've got 25 years experience in manufacturing. I've worked in fabrication, custom fabricating, and consumer packaged goods stuff. Worked for mom and pop shops. I've worked for multinational companies. This crowd you might recognize Flowserve. I don't know if you guys use some of their valves or not, but did a lot of work with Nestle, going around and trying to help people implement systems, a lot of digital transformation work. So yeah, I've been in nuclear, pharmaceutical, oil, gas, and now I'm in aerospace and defense. So ClickBond, we manufacture parts for the F-35, B-2, any stealth fighter. I've got a welding degree, a bunch of welding certs that are way out of date, way too comfortable behind a desk nowadays to be out there welding anymore. Went to BYU and Penn State, master's degree, and I actually teach now up at the University of Nevada, Reno, industrial engineering course. And I think the most important qualification is I'm Trevor's older brother, right? It's probably the only one that matters for this team, but. See, hey, there you go. That's the right response. So what am I going to talk about today? So for me, when you're implementing systems and different types of technologies, there's these two things that play a role in trying to implement new systems. And one of them is fairly common. People talk about it a lot. It's this technical debt piece. I was at a conference much like this one in Florida earlier this year, Rethink, and a CTO got up on stage and was telling a story about technical debt. And he said his CEO went away to a conference like this and came back and said, hey man, we got to implement AI, like right now. Let's do AI. And he says, look, I don't know if we're ready for that, man. First, we got to go implement an ERP. The CEO stops and says, I'm not interested in old technology, man. We need AI. I don't want to do the old stuff. I want to invest in new technologies. And so it's sometimes difficult to talk to people about, in order to go forward, you gotta clean up your debt. You gotta make sure you're solid. And just the definition here of technical debt is this. It's trade-offs you make during the development to prioritize speed over long-term quality. So what does that look like? So that might look like I've got my MRP, Material Resource Planning module. I've got my CMMS, but I'm not going to make them talk to each other. So when the planners are planning the production runs, they don't know when the maintenance guys are going to go perform their maintenance. It's fine. They'll talk to each other. I'm sure they'll talk to each other. We don't need to wait to go live. We can let that integration fall behind. Or maybe what we're going to do is we want to integrate our LMS, so we don't know what operators are qualified to run what processes. So when we're doing our planning and scheduling, we don't know who to have in the right place. These are all pieces of technical debt that start stacking up. They start preventing you from going to the next level of technology. And I think that's what a lot of people are looking at right now when they start looking at AI. We've talked a lot about garbage in, garbage out. It's not necessarily garbage in, garbage out. It's ownership, it's useful data. I would say you may want to pause and ask yourself, why are we comfortable with garbage data in our current state? And why cleaning up that data is going to make us use it going forward. We don't necessarily maybe have a culture that uses data yet. Otherwise, we would have cleaned up our data. We wouldn't have garbage data to pump into these systems. Maybe something to think about. So after that conference, I started thinking about the technical debt that I was facing at ClickBond. We had just gone live with our new ERP system. We chose Epicor, and it was a multi-year struggle and fight every step of the way. I don't know if anybody's been part of a ERP implementation, but it is not a fun situation. What I realized, it wasn't necessarily the technical debt we were fighting, it was this like resistance to change. It was trying to get people to get their data in a place where we could put it into the new system, and they weren't understanding the whys. And they were asking, well, it's always been good enough this way, why are we doing it that way? And so it wasn't necessarily the technical debt. I didn't have a lot of cleanup work to do, getting systems to connect. People were very comfortable taking the time to do it right. It was this idea of cultural debt. And this isn't something that was unique to, this isn't a unique thought, right? I was sitting at the conference thinking about it, and I came back and started doing research, and there's a lot of people talking about it now. There was a conference out in LA a while back, and one of the leaders of SAP started talking about this instead of technical debt now. It's an accumulation of outdated, misaligned, or neglected organizational values and behaviors and norms that limit your progress. So if you're out there trying to implement a software and people are pushing back on you, you have some cultural debt to go address. And that's the idea that I want to talk about, is focusing on the people, then you focus on your processes, and then the technology implementation, it's almost like a vacuum. If the people understand the data and there's a culture around data, they're demanding these things. People, I heard one guy earlier today was talking about, we're using Apple Maps and really, we're using technology to find our ways around places. Why are we not using it to find our ways around the shop floor? People want technology, they know how to use technology, that's the new workforce. You just have to make the use case, and it's not. So, that's these two ideas, cultural debt, technical debt. Now we start talking about the new workforce. I forget where I was flying into, but this was a number of years ago, and it was a rainy night, much like last night, coming into Salt Lake. And I went and jumped in the Uber, and I was talking to the driver. He was talking about his life. He'd just gotten married, just had a kid, and he was talking about driving for Uber. I said, is that, you support a family off of Uber? He's like, well, actually, you see my lanyard here, I actually work for Frontier Airlines. So why are you driving an Uber? It's like, well, when it's rainy or too hot outside, I just call in sick and drive Uber. So that's the new workforce. They're really comfortable working a gig economy. They're really comfortable calling in sick to their steady job and driving Uber for a while because the cultures have shifted. Right? Now we've got a culture of, well, we were profitable, just not as profitable as we told people we're going to be, so we're going to cut some people so we can hit that top line number. That's the culture that people are used to seeing, so why would they have the same type of loyalty to the companies? So you start having this revolving door effect. So now you're stacking technical debt, cultural debt, revolving door. So how do we ever gain any kind of traction in what's going on? I thought it was a really interesting question. What's your name? Melisha asked a very interesting question. It's something I saw at Nestle a lot. Why do I have to go back to the same factory and teach them the same thing over and over and over again? And I would say it's probably a situation of cultural debt. It really depends. I can't tell you that's exactly what you're facing, but as an engineering leader in my company, it drives me crazy when I walk through the engineering offices and their desks are a mess, and I know they just came from telling the operators they had to 5S their area, right? Why do you not practice what you preach? So that's a way you can tell you have some cultural debt. When the signs up all over the factory, safety first, quality starts with you. The slogans don't match the actions. Yeah, safety first unless the order's late. Quality starts with you unless you can push it through and the inspector can't find it, then go for it, right? So having that culture where it starts at the top and comes its way down, you start setting those expectations. I think a lot of us probably have an expectation for people to fill out trip reports. Hey, I went to the machine, this is the work I did, they have to fill out their paperwork. How many of us are going to go home after this conference and fill out a trip report and tell people what we learned when we went and did this conference? Right? I think that's how we start changing some of the narratives. Does anybody, this is the point where I asked for a volunteer from the audience. And I learned something from this morning's session. I think I could probably ask someone to come up here and open up their wallet and hand me all their money and have them sit down, and they will do anything you ask them to do. But I figure I'm not wearing the red dress. You guys just tell me to go pound sand. You wouldn't do what I say. But no, what have you guys done to combat this revolving door effect? Anybody have anything? Yeah, I like that one. That's, looking at our benefits packages and how they were tailored toward kind of the old guard. There's just a lot in there for involuntary, sick leave or, you get hurt. A lot of those older benefits cost the company a lot of money. One thing my company just did is we started an auto lease reimbursement. So you can elect out of some, like the disablement and kind of I got hurt on the job insurance, and we get reimbursement on your vehicle lease. So it's just understanding that you're trying to attract a different type of group. And in order to attract that group, offer something different. All right. Well, I'll share a little story of how I addressed a culture shift. So I lived here, Provo, for about a decade. There's a company down the street. It's called Fast Fill Systems. Fast Fill Systems manufactures hydraulic fittings, cabling, stuff for mines, for refilling mining rigs. We use a lot of CNC machines. My responsibility there was to take an order from a sales guy, order material, program the machine, set up the machine, do the tooling kit, make the parts, send the parts out for coatings, and then deliver it to assembly. And I had several CNC machines and some machinists that reported to me. Right across the street, there's this big company called Flowserve. They have a bunch of CNC machines and a bunch of machinists. And they also had a bunch of signs, one there, there, and there. And they listed all their fancy benefits and how much more per hour they would pay than my guys. So what ended up happening was I'd get a new machinist in, I'd teach him a few things, and he would jump across the street. So I was in this constant revolving door situation where I would bring a guy on, I'd get him just right there where I could, not be answering the phone in the middle of the night anymore, and then he would leave, and it's next guy up. So after 4 or 5 of these, you start to change your culture, right? So I started saying, look, I'll just do it all. You call me, don't worry, if something goes wrong, just call me, I'll answer the phone. And troubleshooting over the phone, there was no FaceTime, so it was like they're trying to explain it to me, but they don't know the terms, and so I would just end up going back into work all the time. And that was the culture I built. It always went through me. I solve all your problems. And about this time, I started my Six Sigma Black Belt project. And, Black Belt's nothing more than creating standards and standardizing processes. And so I started looking at the systems that I was putting in place and the processes I was putting in place and realizing what I needed to do was set these people up for success, right? If I'm expecting them to come to me all the time to solve the problems, then why am I surprised that I'm spending all my time at work? So the first thing I did was I looked at the measuring system. So we're taking measurements. And if you're a machinist, you can use all sorts of different types of tools to get really reliable measures. You're used to using different types of measuring tools, and you're very capable of getting good results using those. But if you were a mechanic who came from an auto shop, and now you're trying to learn to be a machinist, kind of doing a midlife career change, or you're just out of high school, you're not going to know how to use a pair of vernier calipers very well. You're going to struggle. So what could I do to make that variation in the system lower? How could I change the system? So I started looking at better tools for measurement. Not better in the fact that they took better measurements, but better for my system, which was a bunch of untrained people who didn't know how to use the complicated measuring devices. What types of systems could I get that anybody could go and use? Start changing that expectation, start changing that culture of, you come to me, I fix your problem here. These are the tools, and these are tools that I know you can use to solve your problems. From there, we started getting into SPC tracking, so statistical process control. So we're saying, hey, I want you to take that tool that you now know how to use that's good for you. I want you to measure this ID groove, and I want you to put a dot on here. And as that dot moves, 7 of them in a row, it's time to change the insert. Or if it jumps above this line right here, it's time to change the insert. And just working with them. Now, some people took to this and some people didn't. So I was able to use that revolving door to my benefit. I rolled this out on night shift with the brand new guy that I brought on because he didn't know any better. I didn't get any pushback from him. I said, this is what we do. This is how we do it. So using that revolving door to your benefit, saying, hey, this is how it's always been. If you're running into some resistance from some people, they're like, I don't see the value in that. Go where there is no resistance. Prove the value there first. So working with those guys, we started to get a lot of value out of it because typically what they would do is they'd set the machine up, they'd fill the bar feeder up, and they'd go to lunch. They come back from lunch, and the machine's crashed because the insert wore out. Now they could track their insert life, and they knew when they could go take lunch, take a longer break. They wouldn't come back to a big mess, have to do a bunch of tool changes and rehome the turret and all this stuff. And so from the one shift, it spread across all the shifts because everybody started to see the value in it. The next step was, I know how to program and read G code, so I can look at the code and say, okay, that boring bar is going in this size of the hole, it's going in that far, that means I need this size and this length and this insert. If you can read G code, you don't need to have a setup sheet. But again, I'm taking people off the street who don't know how to code, who don't know how to do these things, and expecting them to do that work. So how could I make it easier for them to do their job? Again, not expecting them to come through me, but giving them tools to be able to do their job. So having this standardized setup card that was really easy to read was a big help in getting more of that ownership to them. So now they're able to set up the machine, they're able to run the machine, they're able to understand when things are going wrong. Through all this, changing the system, changing the process, the people started to change. It's at this point now where I would have been able to implement some digital tools, very simply, because now instead of manually writing things down, they could have just used a digital tool, a digital form. Those things weren't out yet, but they would have loved that kind of stuff. One thing I will say is that when you're in your prototyping and iteration phase, it's really nice, unless you have a wizard, and some of these new tools we've seen with the AI creation, maybe you can iterate very quickly with your digital tools. You can change forms really quick on the fly if they're paper pen. And you can get those people who don't create these things often, they can redline one of your things and give it back to you and have some changes. You get a lot more ownership if you can get people involved. One thing that I struggle with as an engineer is I like to see things done the right way, and the right way is just my idea. It's not even necessarily a right idea. A quote that I find interesting is, "You'll be surprised how productive people can be doing things their inefficient way," right? To you it seems inefficient, but they're really productive, right? So try to give people some latitude. Yeah, maybe they come up with a new template or a new way of doing the form that you don't think is the right way, but give them some latitude to own it, right? It will mean more to you if they own this thing than if you create it in this perfect way that you think is perfect and then force them to use your thing. Try and get them to own it. Try and get them to create it with you. And if it's paper, sometimes it's easier for some of these guys who aren't as technically savvy to create some of these things. All right. So just want to try and wrap some of this up here. Culture is what you do, not what you say. So if you're out on the shop floor and you're saying one thing and people walk by your office and they see something different, or they see you have a different expectation for this team than that team, you have a culture shift, a culture issue. I would say that if you're talking about, well, if we put garbage in, we'll get garbage out with our data, you don't have a culture that respects data yet. If you had a culture that was ready to use AI, their data would be good already. There wouldn't be this garbage data. They would have data that they understand, that they use, that they're ready to put into a system. The last point I want to make here is, for the longest time, we talk about projects and digital transformation projects, we talk about proof of concept. So bring someone out, hey, come do this proof of concept for me. I want to see, can you do this? That's not the case anymore, right? You've got that's the back table of engineering wizards back there. They can do anything you can dream of. There's no more proof of concept needed with a lot of these digital transformations. If you can dream it up, we can get a sensor and we can get a report and we can get a Power BI and we can do. There's no more it's proof of value, right? You're not looking for proof of concept. You're looking for a proof of value. And I always hesitate when a company tells me that they want to implement an LMS. I want to implement a CMMS. I want to implement an ERP. Because they're just implementing something, a strategy of digital transformation. You should really be talking about the problem you want to solve. I want to solve this problem. What's the right tool? Really recently, our quality department wanted to launch a quality management system, a QMS. And they launched it, and they didn't spend a lot of time talking cross-functionally, and we ended up with a system that's very difficult to use. They went live, and we tried to upload work instructions, and they don't load right because they wanted to launch a quality management system. They didn't want to find a way to get work instructions to operators simply. Because if that would have been the approach, hey, we want to try and get work instructions to the operators on the shop floor on a tablet. Okay, you don't need a QMS for that. Maybe it's an LMS. Maybe Redlist can help me get work instructions to operators. If you approach it from, what's the problem I want to solve? What's my proof of value? Then you can get much further faster. So, thank you.